What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors walks into what should have been a warm, friendly morning chat only to discover the host is far more interested in provocation than conversation? In just 37 seconds, single dismissive comment about working-class roots exposed the entitlement lurking beneath Lorraine Kelly's cheerful television persona, leading to one of the most unexpected on-air confrontations of daytime TV. The morning at the ITV studios began like any other. Michael Caine's legendary actor, Oscar winner, an unmistakable voice of British cinema, had agreed to appear on Lorraine's show to discuss his newest film. At 89, Caine had lived through nearly every version of fame. The hungry, uncertain beginning in London's East End. The breakthrough roles that defined an era. The decades of acclaim, reinvention, and resilience. He settled comfortably into the bright studio chair, expecting the usual light-hearted chatter that morning television promised. Lorraine, seated across from him with her ever-present smile, seemed perfectly pleasant. As the cameras came alive, Lorraine launched into her practiced introduction. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by the wonderful Michael Caine, who needs no introduction." She turned toward him, her smile unwavering. "Now, Michael, you've had such an incredible career spanning over 60 years. What keeps you motivated at this stage of your life?" Caine leaned forward, eyes glowing with the quiet energy he'd carried his whole life. "Well, Lorraine, it's the same thing that's always motivated me. I come from very humble beginnings in South London, and I never forget where I came from. Every role I take, every film I work on, needs about telling stories that matter to ordinary people. That's what keeps me going." Lorraine nodded, but something in her face shifted. A subtle tightening around the eyes that suggested she wasn't fully invested. Yes, your background is quite well documented, isn't it? The whole rags to riches story. But surely now, with all your success, you must feel rather removed from those early days." The question caught him off guard, not because of the content, but because of the dismissive tone. He straightened, choosing his words with care. "I wouldn't say removed, no. If anything, success makes me even more appreciative of where I started. When you've known real poverty, real struggle, you don't forget it. It shapes who you are." "Oh, come now, Michael." Lorraine's smile thinned, sharpening around the edges. "Surely that's a bit theatrical. You've been living in luxury for decades, multi-million-pound homes, private jets, mixing with the elite. Don't you think clinging to this working-class image is a bit disingenuous?" The studio fell noticeably quieter. Even the crew sensed the shift in air pressure, the kind that comes right before a storm. Caine's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed steady. "I'm not clinging to anything, Lorraine. I'm being honest about my experiences. Success doesn't erase your past. It shouldn't. Those years growing up poor, watching my mom struggle, they made me who I am." Lorraine leaned back, crossing her legs in a gesture that somehow conveyed both confidence and condescension. "But don't you think the audience might find it a bit tiresome? This constant reference to your humble beginnings. How long can you really play that card?" The phrase struck the air like a slap. "Play that card." Caine repeated, his iconic voice dropping into a dangerously calm register. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Well, let's be honest," she went on, oblivious to the tension she was fueling. "Every interview, every appearance, it's always the same story. Poor boy from London makes good. Don't you think it's time to move beyond that narrative? Your fans might appreciate a bit more authenticity." The irony of accusing Michael Caine of lacking authenticity was lost entirely on her, and in that moment, caught on camera. Broadcast lived the atmosphere in the studio shifted from polite conversation to something far more volatile, setting the stage for one of the most stunning walkouts the show had ever seen. Here she was, questioning his authenticity while displaying a complete misunderstanding of what authenticity truly meant. Michael Caine sat perfectly still for a moment, absorbing not only her words, but the casual cruelty woven into them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of nearly 9 decades of struggle, triumph, and lived experience. Authenticity, he said, tasting the word as if deciding whether it still belonged in this conversation. You want to talk about authenticity, Lorraine? Authenticity is remembering the woman who raised you when everyone else had given up. It's never forgetting the people who believed in you when you had nothing. It's staying true to your values even when you're sitting in a television studio being told that your life story is tiresome. Lorraine's smile flickered, the first crack in her polished on-air composure. But she pressed forward with the determination of someone who had never truly faced hardship. "Oh, I'm not saying your story isn't inspiring, Michael," she insisted. "I'm simply suggesting that perhaps your audience would enjoy hearing more about your current lifestyle, your recent successes, rather than dwelling on the past. After all, that was a very long time ago." "A very long time ago," Caine repeated. His voice dropped into that gravelly, unmistakable tone that had echoed through cinemas for generations. The words seemed to reverberate through the studio. "Ah." And for the first time, Lorraine appeared to sense she might have stepped over a line. But instead of retreating, she pushed further, driven by a kind of privileged confidence that comes from never having to fight for your place in the world. "Well, yes," she said, shifting in her chair as if adjusting her authority along with her posture. "You're a knighted, successful actor now. You've won Oscars. You have homes around the world. Surely those early struggles are ancient history." Caine's hands, which had rested calmly on the chair's arms, curled slowly into fist's knot out of anger. But the tightly controlled strength of someone who spent a lifetime proving himself to people, who never had to prove anything to anyone. "Ancient history," he repeated quietly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout ever could. "Is that what you call the experiences that shape a human being?" "Now, don't get defensive," Lorraine said with a patronizing laugh that cut through the air like a razor. "I'm simply giving you an opportunity to talk about your current life. Our viewers are far more interested in the glamorous Michael Caine of today than in old sob stories from decades past." The phrase sob stories hit the room like a physical blow. Several crew members exchanged uneasy glances. Even the newest production assistant, the one still afraid to breathe too loudly seemed to sense that something had gone terribly wrong. But Lorraine sat there, perfectly styled, perfectly composed, perfectly unaware that she had just dismissed the very experiences that had forged one of Britain's most respected actors. Caine was silent for a long moment. His piercing blue eyes studied her face as though he were seeing her for the first time, seeing the shallowness beneath the smile, the entitlement behind the question. When he finally spoke again, his voice held the quiet force of someone who earned every syllable. "Sob stories," he said slowly. "You think the story of a woman working 3 jobs to feed her children is a sob story? You think a boy leaving school at 15 to support his family is a sob story?" "Michael, please don't twist my words," Lorraine interjected quickly. But there was a tremor beneath her practiced tone, now a crack in her confidence. She had spent years interviewing celebrities eager to please. Guests who would laugh politely and swallow every insult just to promote their latest project. But she had never dealt with someone unwilling to bow to superficiality. "I'm not twisting anything," Caine replied, calm as marble. "I'm repeating what you said. You dismissed the experiences that made me who I am. You suggested my connection to my past is some kind of performance. You implied authenticity means forgetting where you come from." Lorraine shifted again, her discomfort now unmistakable. For the first time, she seemed to realize the magnitude of her miscalculation. But instead of apologizing, instead of stepping back, she made the fatal mistake of trying to regain control by leaning even harder into condescension. And the interview was about to take a turn she never expected. "Look, I think you're being a bit oversensitive," Lorraine said, attempting a laugh that didn't quite land. "This is morning television, Michael. We're supposed to be having a light, fun conversation. You're making this far too serious." "Oversensitive," Caine repeated. The way he said it, quiet, measured, and edged with danger, made several crew members straighten. "Let me ask you something, Lorraine. Have you ever gone to bed hungry? Have you ever watched your mother cry because she couldn't afford proper shoes for her children? Have you ever been looked down on because of how you spoke or where you came from?" Lorraine's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping on dry land. She had no answer because she had never lived any of those realities. She had grown up in a safe, middle-class home, attended good schools, and stepped into television work without ever having to claw her way up. The idea that someone might hold on to their past out of gratitude, not self-pity, was foreign to her. "Well, that's not really the point," she said finally, her confidence beginning to crumble. "The point is, you've overcome all that. You're successful now. Why dwell on the negative?" "Because it's not negative," Caine replied, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on hers with unblinking intensity. "Those experiences taught me empathy. They taught me humility and hard work and the value of real human connection. They taught me that success means nothing if you forget the people who helped you achieve it. But I suppose someone who's never had to struggle wouldn't understand that." The words were precise, surgical, and devastating. Lorraine's face flushed red as her mask of practiced professionalism slipped entirely. "That's completely uncalled for," she snapped, her voice pitching higher. "You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through." "You're absolutely right," Caine said calmly, returning to his usual even tone without losing an ounce of force. "I don't know your life. But I know what you've shown me in the last few minutes. You've shown me that you think poverty is a sob story. That authenticity is something to be mocked or questioned. That success should make a person ashamed of where they came from." Lorraine opened her mouth to interrupt, but Caine lifted a hand, firm, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. "And most importantly," he continued, "you've shown me that you believe you can sit there, in your comfortable chair, in your safe studio, and dismiss the experiences of millions of working-class people who have fought their entire lives for a fraction of what you take for granted." The studio fell completely silent. The only sound was the low electrical hum of the cameras. Even the director sat frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment unfold. Lorraine's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for support, but none came. She was entirely alone because she had created this situation. Her arrogance, her dismissiveness, her assumption that she could control the narrative had led her directly into a confrontation she was ill-equipped to handle. "I think we should move on to your new film," she said finally, her voice trembling in a way she couldn't disguise. She fumbled through her stack of cue cards, her hands visibly shaking, searching for refuge in printed lines and rehearsed transitions. The contrast was stark. Moments earlier, she'd spoken with the breezy confidence of a host accustomed to holding power in every interview. Now, the condescension had evaporated, replaced by something small and uncertain, panic, maybe, or the realization that she had pushed too far and awakened someone who would not be patronized or diminished. Caine didn't move. He simply watched her with that calm, penetrating stare, the kind that had commanded attention on screen for generations. It was the stare of a man who had survived far worse than an uncomfortable TV segment. The stare of someone who knew, with absolute clarity, who he was and where he came from. And Lorraine Kelly, for perhaps the first time in her career, understood she was no longer the one in control. Caine wasn't finished, not even close. Something inside him had finally cracked open, not in a moment of rage, but in a slow, controlled release of everything he had carried for decades. All the years of dealing with people who dismissed his roots, who treated his background as something to tiptoe around or quietly look down upon, had built to this single moment. "No," he said. Just one word, but it landed with the weight of a lifetime. It was firmer than a speech, heavier than a shout, and so quiet the studio seemed to lean forward to hear it. "We're not moving on," Caine continued, locking eyes with her. "Because this right here is the problem. The moment someone challenges your comfortable worldview, you want to brush it aside. Change the subject. Pretend it doesn't matter. But that isn't how real conversations work, Lorraine. And it's definitely not how real life works." Kelly's professional mask, the polished one she wore so easily on camera, cracked completely. Beneath it was someone suddenly exposed. Someone who wasn't accustomed to being confronted so directly, especially not by a guest she assumed would play along. "Michael, you're blowing this out of proportion," she insisted, her voice rising with a mix of panic and frustration. "I was simply trying to conduct an interview about your current projects. You're the one turning this into some kind of lecture about class warfare." The phrase class warfare seemed to echo in the air, heavy and accusing. A few crew members exchanged looks. Everyone knew the moment had crossed into something deeper, something raw. Caine stared at her for a long, measured moment before answering. When he finally spoke, it wasn't anger that came through, it was disappointment. And somehow, that was far more devastating. "Class warfare," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it when someone refuses to be ashamed of where they came from? When someone suggests that working-class experiences have value? That dignity isn't exclusive to people with polished educations and refined manners." "That's not what I said," Kelly protested. But even she didn't believe her own defense. Her voice wavered. She knew exactly what she had implied on, so did everyone else. The dismissiveness hadn't been an accident or a poor choice of words. It had been honest. Honest in the worst possible way. Caine pushed his chair back slightly, not dramatically, but enough to signal that the tone of the entire exchange had shifted. Everyone in the studio felt it. "You know what the real tragedy is, Lorraine?" he said quietly. "It's not that you don't understand where I come from. It's that you don't want to understand. You've built your whole career on talking to people, on supposedly connecting with audiences, but you aren't interested in listening." "Not really. That's not true," Kelly said immediately, but even her protest sounded thin. "I listen to all my guests. I've interviewed thousands of people. Have you?" Caine asked, tilting his head, studying her. "Or have you just waited for them to finish talking so you could read your next pre-written question?" Because there's a difference. There's a very big difference between hearing words and actually listening to someone's life, someone's struggle, someone's values. Kelly opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. She had no defense left. Every dismissive comment she had made earlier, every condescending tone, every subtle attempt to minimize his experience, it had all stripped away her polished television persona and revealed exactly who she was underneath. Caine took a breath, his voice growing steadier, stronger. "I've spent my entire career telling stories that matter," he said. "Stories about real people facing real challenges. Stories about dignity, about what it means to work hard, hold your family together, and stay true to where you came from. Stories about remembering what actually matters in life. And I won't apologize for honoring that. Not to you. Not to anyone." The studio had gone completely silent. And for the first time since the interview began, Kelly had nothing left to hide behind. "You said..." "And you sit there," Caine said, his voice low but razor sharp, "and call those stories tiresome sob stories from ancient history." The words landed like a verdict. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Kelly's humiliation. Her eyes darted around the studio, desperately searching for an escaping assistant to intervene, a producer to cut to commercial, a miracle. But there was nowhere to run. She had created this moment through her own arrogance. And now she was trapped in it, on air, under bright lights, with nowhere to hide. Perhaps we could take a short break, she suggested weakly, clinging to the hope that a pause might allow her to regain control. But Caine was already rising from his chair. The movement was calm, deliberate, dignified, the unmistakable posture of a man who had reached his limit. A man who would not endure one more second of disrespect. He reached up, unclipped the small microphone from his jacket, and set it gently on the table. The tiny click echoed louder than any shout. "I think I've said everything that needs to be said," he stated simply. Kelly's face drained of color as she watched her interview her carefully structured show. Her polished on-air identity disintegrate in front of her. This wasn't just a guest walking out. This was a public unraveling of her professional persona. "Michael, please?" she whispered, leaning forward as if she could pull him back with her voice alone. "Let's just finish the interview. We can talk about your film, your upcoming projects. Please, don't leave like this." Caine paused near the edge of the interview area, then turned back to her one last time. His face was no longer angry. If anything, it carried the deep sadness of someone confronting something he wished he didn't have to see. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said softly. This was never about the interview. It was never about a film or a project. This was about basic human respect. About treating people's experience as people's struggles. Their triumphs with the dignity they deserve. He took a slow step closer. And the weight of his voice filled the room. "I've worked with some of the greatest directors, actors and artists of the last 60 years, he said. "I've met presidents and prime ministers, kings and queens. And you know what I've learned? The most interesting, the most valuable, the most authentic people are the ones who remember their struggles. The ones who honor their past. The ones who never forget where they came from." His eyes locked with hers. "But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Because you've never had to fight for anything in your entire life." Kelly's breath caught. The words struck her like blows, each one stripping away another layer of her polished confidence. She sat stiffly in her expensive studio chair, surrounded by the glittering trappings of television success. Exposed as someone who had built a career on other people's stories while understanding none of them, Caine straightened his jacket, quiet dignity in every gesture. Without rushing, he began to walk toward the studio exit. His steps echoed in the heavy silence that fell across the entire set. No one moved. No one spoke. The crew, the assistants, the audience, everyone watched as one of Britain's most respected actors chose self-respect over camera time. Authenticity over politeness, dignity over accommodation. The door. He paused but did not turn around. "Good luck with the rest of your show." "Lorraine," he said, his voice carrying a faint trace of pity. "I hope someday you learn the difference between entertainment and exploitation." And then Michael Caine walked out. The cameras captured everything, the stunned stillness, the shock on Kelly's face, the hollow silence filling the space he had just vacated. She sat alone in her interview area, surrounded by the wreckage she had created with a single dismissive comment, in just 37 seconds. Her casual slight about working-class roots had revealed the entire truth. The difference between earned respect and borrowed authority. Between genuine connection and superficial performance. And now the whole world had seen it.